Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rink-Side with Hits and Clips. Well, round three has officially come to an end. Every matchup in the CHL round three playoffs swept their opponent except for one QMJHL matchup that we'll cover very shortly. But before we get to this episode, thank you everyone for your patience. Thank you so much to everyone for your support as we've been trying to get as many videos recorded, edited, and published on a continuous basis, just resulting around busy schedules. And there's just been a lot going on. So we appreciate your support and your patience. We are going to be covering multiple videos surrounding round three CHL playoffs. We're going to be surrounding the news that just broke out of one particular AHL team that I will cover in another episode. Then there will be another episode where me and Zach got together and we did a recording. So that one will be coming out very shortly too. And then we also will have more podcast related episodes coming out in regards to the PJHL Update Championships series of who won the Schmaltz Cup, as well as who has advanced to round number two of the NHL playoffs, as well as covering the AHL as well. So let's get started. Well, if you're new to our channel, thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate everyone who has been engaging with our content, commenting on our YouTube videos, liking our pages as well. So we really appreciate it. And like I said, there's been a lot of busyness that's been going on in terms of our own personal schedules. So we have been doing our part as much as possible to update, edit, record videos on the side. But there will also be another very special announcement coming out very shortly in regards to our overall channel and how we can extend it, not just through individual social platforms, but just through one particular element of our channel content. So be sure to keep your eye on that news. But now we are going to be covering the Conference Championship Series for the OHL, WHL, and the QMJHL. So we're going to start with the OHL. And like I said, every series they swept their opponent except for one series in particular in the QMJHL. So we're going to get to that in a moment. But we're going to start with the OHL. And it was my two OHL teams who went head to head against each other, the Barrie Colts and the Oshawa Generals. Now, I grew up in Markham and I live in Uxbridge. So I'm north of Oshawa, but I'm southeast of Barrie. And since I grew up in the middle of both those two teams, I figured that that would be, a great rivalry to have. I was hoping that maybe earlier on in my time when I lived in Markham, that maybe Markham would look to expand to the OHL. Now, I first got interested in the OHL probably back maybe like 10 years ago, maybe shorter than that, but once I started to understand the OHL a little bit more, then I started to get interested in the Western Hockey Leagues and the QMJHL and just the CHL overall. So that's how I started to get a little bit more into the OHL side of things. I have family up in Barrie. I have lots of friends in Oshawa. So it was just kind of, it was such, I loved both teams. I know a lot of people that work for both of these teams too. So it's kind of made sense for me to have two teams to root on for. And in the back of my mind, even throughout the season in the playoffs, I'm like, okay, so I want these two teams to face off against each other. And if this team can beat this team, then my first OHL team can face off against my other OHL team. And so that's exactly what happened as we had the conference championship series between Barrie and Oshawa. I couldn't ask for anything better than this. I was actually expecting a little bit more out of the series, to be honest. I was hoping that maybe this series would go to, if not game seven, maybe five or six. But unfortunately, this game only ended in four. I was hoping to get up to some games in Barrie if Barrie was able to win a game after dropping the first two games at home. I mean, that's playoff hockey. Just got to accept the end result. And overall, The Oshawa Generals end up advancing to the OHL Championship Series. At least I knew one of these teams were going to win. Unfortunately, the end result is my other team would be eliminated. But in the end, it was just a privilege to watch both of these teams compete in the conference finals. So let's just break down of how this series unfolded. So Oshawa, obviously, they swept Barrie. Well, on Friday, April 25th, the Oshawa Generals defeated the Barrie Colts on the road, winning that game 3-1, so they have a 1-0 series lead. Sunday, April 27th for game number 2, I was a little bit surprised about how fierce Oshawa was. I was expecting maybe Barrie to come out and give Oshawa a little bit of a run for themselves, but it just seemed like Oshawa was just too strong of an opponent. Oshawa ends up crushing Barrie in game number 2, 7-1. This game was actually, I believe, it was 7-0 or 6-0, and then Barrie ended up scoring. This series ends up shifting back to Oshawa, which means Barrie's just going to have to bring their best efforts and not do what they did at home. They're going to have to win one on the road. We all know that the Oshawa General fans love Keishon Aitchison. I think they'd be really stoked to see him on that team. I'm just kidding, but I think if Keishon Aitchison was to get drafted to, say, I don't know, a Canadian team or a Canadian market that's very supported by another NHL team, I think the Oshawa Generals might have mixed feelings about Keishon Aitchison in the NHL draft. So we're gonna have to see how that unfolds. Speaking of the NHL draft, though, if anyone was unaware, the New York Islanders won the first overall NHL draft pick spot in the upcoming draft in Los Angeles this summer. So, congratulations to the New York Islanders. There are a couple of OHL players that are potentially set to get chosen in, if not the first 3 picks, the first round of some sorts. Those picks would be Matthew Schaefer of the Erie Otters and the 2 Misa brothers of both the Saginaw Spirit and the Brampton Steelheads. But overall, I think we're going to expect a tremendous, outstanding NHL draft. And I think a lot of teams will be surprised of how their end result for their draft overall pick will turn out to be. And in case you also missed it too, the Utah Hockey Club recently just announced their new team name as the Utah Mammoth, and I just love the name overall. Not only that, but they also got the 4th pick in the first round of the NHL draft too. So there's a lot of great potential for this Utah hockey team now that they're the Mammoth. I think that after I was just even thinking, even this morning after I woke up, I was just thinking like, wow, they went from the Arizona Coyotes, a market that just really, if they were a little bit more organized in the business side of things, we probably wouldn't even see this out of the Utah Mammoth team now. But overall, I think we're going to expect high potential from the Mammoth organization out in Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, getting back to this game, it was the Oshawa Generals who came up in double overtime, defeating the Barrie Colts with a final score of 7-6. And that was the best game, I have to say, out of this entire series. I was really hoping that Barrie would win that game just because I wanted to go and see another game up in Barrie for the season. But again, you're playing against the Oshawa Generals. If I had to really see who the London Knights were going to play, I honestly I could have saw either team, but with how strong Oshawa was as an overall group, I definitely saw Oshawa winning this game. Maybe not in a sweep, but they certainly proved themselves there. So at this point, the Oshawa Generals take a 3-0 series lead. They're looking to move on to the OHL Championship Series to take on the London Knights in game number 4. And then on Thursday, May 1st, well, it was the Oshawa Generals who came out on top, winning that game 8-4 over Barrie. They eliminate the Barrie Colts. I was actually watching this game, and I believe it was like 3-3 at the end of the third, and like 2 minutes into the beginning of the third period, Oshawa just scored 2 quick goals. I think Barrie took a couple of penalties during that moment too, so it just seemed like things were collapsing for the Colts at this point. But overall, the Generals win this series. They're moving on to the OHL Championship Series, and they will take on the London Knights for the 2nd consecutive year in a row. Well, speaking of the London Knights, this was a team that I was expecting to sweep their opponent, which they did, but I was also expecting that Kitchener would make this a little bit tighter and a little bit more challenging for London, but it wouldn't stop the Knights as they ended up sweeping the Kitchener Rangers 4-0. And let's just see how this game unfolded. So on Friday, April 25th, the London Knights defeated the Kitchener Rangers 5-2, taking a 1-0 series lead. In game number two on Sunday, April 27th, the London Knights defeated Kitchener once again in London, winning that game 6-2. And then on Monday, April 28th, we shift back over to Kitchener, where it was London who once again defeated Kitchener with the final score of 3-2. So they take a 3-0 series lead, looking to sweep Kitchener in game number four, and that's exactly what they did. As on Wednesday, April 30th, for game number four, London defeats Kitchener 4-2. They win the series 4-0. They sweep the Rangers and they will take on the Oshawa Generals. So, except for game number three of the Oshawa Berry series, there wasn't really much competitiveness from both of these two clubs. Again, I think if you look at it from a season standpoint, yes, maybe if they're, if you could extend it to maybe another 5 or 7 games, you know, a best of 12, then maybe they could have won a couple of games. I would have hoped so. But just in the end, you have the two best teams in the OHL again this year. They face off in the OHL finals, and you're going to expect a lot from these two teams going into the final series for the OHL. So for the championship series between London and Oshawa, so the scheduled dates are updated on my tablet. However, it only says pre-game, so there's no times on there. So I have the times here from their social media accounts. So game one for this series, it's going to take place on Thursday, May 8th at 7 p.m. in London at Canada Life Place. Game two in London again on Saturday, May 10th at 7 p.m. Then we're going to shift over to Oshawa for game number 3 and 4. Monday, May 12th at 7 p.m. Game 3 will take place at the Tribute Community Center. Game 4 back in Oshawa again on Tuesday, May 13th at 7 p.m. Then, if necessary, Game 5 will take place on Thursday, May 15th at 7 p.m. in London. Game number 6 on Saturday, May 17th at 7 p.m. in Oshawa again, and then obviously if needed, Game 7 will take place on Monday, May 19th in London, but the time is to be determined. So that is a look into the Oshawa and London series for the championship series in the Ontario Hockey League. All right, we are going to move on to the Western Hockey League now Conference Championship Series, and it was the Medicine Hat Tigers who swept the Lethbridge Hurricanes. I was a little bit surprised about that one. I thought Lethbridge would definitely win some games out of that series. But nevertheless, the Medicine Hat Tigers will move on to the championship series. They win the Eastern Conference, and they will either take on the winner of Spokane or Portland. Well, I can safely say that the Spokane Chiefs will be their opponent in the finals, as they also swept their opponent, Portland. So it just seems like we were seeing a lot of sweeps in the conference championships series, and I don't know what it was, whether a lot of these teams just wanted to get it over with and just accept the end result, but I don't think that this was what everyone expected, especially for 5 of these 6 series getting swept. So it is official, Medicine Hat will take on Spokane in the championship series of the WHL, but let's just recap of how these two series unfolded. Well, in game number 1 on Friday, April 25th in Medicine Hat, it was the Tigers who defeated Lethbridge, winning that game 5-2. Then on Saturday, April 26th, the next day in Medicine Hat, the Tigers crushed Lethbridge, winning that game 7-2. We move on to game number 3, and with game 3 and 4 taking place in Lethbridge on Tuesday, April 29th, it was the Medicine Hat Tigers who once again win their game 7-6, except that game was in overtime. And then for a chance for the Medicine Hat Tigers to move on to the championship series on Wednesday, April 30th, for game number 4, the Medicine Hat Tigers defeated Lethbridge 5-3, and they will take on the Western Conference champion opponent in the championship series. Well, as I mentioned, the Spokane Chiefs, they swept Portland as well. On Friday, April 25th, it was the Spokane Chiefs who hit double digits in their victory as they defeated Portland 10-4. and they take a 1-0 series lead. On Sunday, April 27th, Spokane wins their game yet again, except this was in overtime, winning that game 6-5. And now we head back to Portland, hoping that Portland can have some kind of momentum to get back in this series. Well, on Wednesday, April 30th, for game number 3, Spokane comes out on top, defeating Portland with a final score of 8-5. And then for game number 4, with a 3-0 series lead, Spokane defeats Portland 6-4, and they also sweep their opponent for the Western Conference Championship title. And as a result, Medicine Hat will take on the Spokane Chiefs in the WHL Championship Series. So similar to the OHL schedule for the championship series, the dates have been scheduled, but the times have not on my tablet here on the CHL website. So for game number 1, this will take place with Medicine Hat having home advantage. Game 1 takes place on Friday, May 9th at 7 p.m. Game 2 in Medicine Hat on Sunday, May 11th at 7 p.m. We shift over to Spokane for game number 3 and 4. Game number 3 taking place on Tuesday, May 13th at 7 p.m. and game number 4 on Wednesday, May 14th at 7 p.m. Then, if necessary, game number 5 will take place in Spokane on Friday, May 16th at 7 p.m. Game number 6 in Medicine Hat on Sunday, May 18th at 7 p.m. And then, if necessary, obviously, Game 7 on Monday, May 19th at 7 p.m. in Medicine Hat again. And just to let everyone know that all of these games can be streamed both on Victory Plus and on TSN. So TSN will be having these championship series broadcasted on the network. And just before we move on to the QMJHL, I did want to mention a couple of updates regarding the Western Hockey League. So the first news coming out of the Western Hockey League regarding the Moose Jaw Warriors is that they have earned the first overall pick in the first ever 3-round CHL import draft. And it says also, too, that teams will also be permitted to trade picks. So this is going to start on July 2nd. Moose Jaw has earned their first overall pick in the first ever CHL round of the CHL import draft. And the second news I just wanted to update in regards to the WHL as well. It's involving the newly expansion BC division of the Penticton Vs. And so I will put a logo right in the corner right here. And this is the new Penticton Vs logo that they have just unveiled. And if you've been following the BCHL, it's the same logo, but they've just revamped their color scheme a little bit more. So it looks like they've gone with like a navy blue. I really like the color scheme that they have chosen for the Penticton Vs. And so as you can see, this is the new updated, unveiled logo for the upcoming newly expansioned Penticton Vs that will begin in the 2025-26 season. So now we are going to cover the QMJHL semifinals, conference final series, and just unfold of what actually took place. Well, we're going to start with the Moncton Wildcats and the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies series. And well, it will be the Moncton Wildcats competing for the Gilles Courteau Trophy of the QMJHL as they swept the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies 4-0. And let's see how this series unfolded. Well, on April 24th, for game number 1, the Moncton Wildcats defeated the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies in Moncton 5-3. For game number 2, the Moncton Wildcats defeated Rouyn-Noranda Huskies on April 25th with a final score of 2-1. Then we shift over to Rouyn-Noranda for games 3 and 4. And it was Moncton once again coming out on top, winning that game 4-3 on April 29th. And then on April 30th for game number 4, the Moncton Wildcats defeated Rouyn-Noranda in overtime 4-3. They sweep Rouyn-Noranda and they will head to the championship series where they will either take on Rimouski or Shawinigan. Well, this was the only series matchup that went more than 4 games in round number 2 for the conference finals series. in the entire CHL, and it was the Rune Huskies who just last night defeated the Shawinigan Cataracts, winning the series 4-3. They win Game 7 in double overtime. So we're going to recap of how this all started. Well, let's just recap from game number 1. Well, on April 25th, the Rimouski Oceanic defeated Shawinigan 5-1. They take a 1-0 series lead. Then on April 27th, Rimouski just destroys Shawinigan on home ice, winning that game 7-0, as they also get a shutout too. We shift over to Shawinigan for games 3 and 4, and then in game 3 on April 29th, the Shawinigan Cataracts, they come out with their first victory of this series, winning that game 5-2. So at this point, it is a 2-1 series lead in favor of the Oceanic. We go to game number 4, still in Shawinigan. We will need double overtime for this game, and on April 30th, it was the Shawinigan Cataracts defeating Rimouski 3-2 in double overtime, and they tie the series 2-2 at this point. Well, we go to game number 5 on May 2nd in Rimouski, and in overtime, the Rimouski Oceanic defeat Shawinigan 3-2, and Rimouski, they once again take their series lead back, winning that game 3-2. That means we will need a game number 6. Well, on May 4th, back in Shawinigan, the Shawinigan Cataracts keep their season alive as they defeat Rimouski 5-1, and they force a game number 7. So I wasn't watching any of these games live, but I was just actually hoping that this would go to 7 games, just because I needed a little bit more time to edit and record videos. So I was hoping that this would go to a game 7, and it did. And it took place last night on May 6th. And it was Rimouski who came out on top 4-3, winning the game in double overtime. They win the series 4-3, and the Rimouski Oceanic, the hosts of the Memorial Cup this year, will be moving on to the QMJHL finals, and they will compete for the Gillies Courteau Trophy against the Moncton Wildcats. Well, reading the schedule off in French, we have our championship series schedule for both Moncton and Rimouski. Game number 1 will take place on May 10th at 4 p.m. in Moncton, and game number 2 will take place May 11th at 6 p.m. in Moncton. Then we'll shift over to Rimouski for games 3 and 4. Game 3 will take place on May 14th at 7 p.m. in Rimouski. Game 4 in Rimouski on May 15th at 7 p.m. Then, if necessary, Game 5 will take place on May 17th at 6 p.m. in Moncton. We'll shift over to Rimouski again for game number 6 if necessary on May 19th at 1 p.m. And then on May 20th for game number 7 if necessary at 6 p.m. back in Moncton. Game 7 will take place to wrap things up for the QMJHL Championship Series. So that is a look of the overall results for the conference final series for both the OHL, WHL, and QMJHL. And, well, we only have 2 teams left in each league. So that is an overall glimpse and update for the schedule as well, and just a couple of updates in between for each of these leagues. So thank you everyone for your support. We really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos like this. Be sure to follow us on Spotify for our podcast version and over on Bluesky for all of our latest up-to-date notifications. Thanks, and we'll see you again soon.